How does inflation work? If you think for a moment, you'll find it hard to fathom how a new home purchase for $173,200 in 2009 now costs over $379,100. If you once purchased a Rolls Royce in 2010, I bet you would need twice that amount to purchase the same Rolls Royce. Have you ever had the impression that your money isn't sufficient as it used to be? Well, it is not likely a figment of your thoughts. Theoretically, the prices of products and services have skyrocketed over time, and this is a result of one factor: inflation. But what exactly is inflation? Why does it happen? And do you have to be concerned if it occurs? Stay tuned to find out. So, the impact of inflation is a concept in economics where prices of goods and services skyrocket over time. It's a typical component of the global economic phases. When the cost of goods and services rises steadily over time, your purchasing power and the number of goods and services you can get for your money decrease. The fact that prices continually go up is among the strangest aspects of economic life. Prices and incomes in the past were remarkably different from those in the present. In simple terms, inflation indicates that your money might not be as valuable today as it was in the past. So let's take this example. The average price of coffee in 1980 was $2, right? Well, the average cost of a movie ticket increased to $9 in 2019. $10 from 1980 wouldn't be enough to purchase 2 coffees in 2019, as it did nearly 4 decades earlier if you had saved it. So it's important to keep in mind that an increase in the price of a single commodity or service is not the same thing as inflation. Instead, inflation refers to the simultaneous and ongoing price increases of several items you usually purchase. So, it is not only your grocery bill that will go up, but you will also see an increase in the price of gas, electricity, transportation, and other expenditures. Although there is still considerable disagreement on some claims, many investors believe gold to be the best inflation hedge. So, for instance, the price of gold climbed by 7.6% a year on average between April 1968 and June 2020. The returns averaged 3.6% after inflation adjustment. However, gold's value fell by 28% and 12% respectively in 2013 and 2015, indicating that it's not the reliable safe haven some believe it to be. Well, this is due to the fact that the price of gold can fluctuate greatly over time and is influenced by changes in the value of other currencies, decisions made by other central banks regarding monetary policy, as well as irregular supply and demand. Additionally, investing in gold has a special set of difficulties. If you purchase gold, you must locate a safe place to store it, which has additional charges. Gold is subject to a higher long-term capital gains tax rate than stocks and bonds when sold after being held for a year or more. A country's overall economy, as well as sector or industry like the automakers or energy industries, may ultimately experience inflation. As a matter of fact, governments closely monitor inflation and work to reduce it. They also gather a great amount of data to enable them to report the inflation rate with astounding accuracy. Although it can be discouraging to realize that your money is depreciating, most economists view a tiny amount of inflation as a positive indicator of a robust economy. A mild inflation rate urges you to invest or use your money now rather than stowing it away and watching it lose value. If inflation spirals out of control and decreases significantly, it can become a damaging force for an economy. Unchallenged inflation may destroy a nation's economy, as Venezuela experienced back in 2018 when its rate of inflation reached over 1,000,000% per month, leading to the economic collapse of the country and the exodus of countless inhabitants. See, civilization has become increasingly fixated on regulating inflation and preoccupied with quantifying it. But why does inflation exist? Well, supply and demand, two distinct economic drivers, are frequently out of balance. See, supply, which is determined by the companies that are supplying the commodity or service, indicates how much of a good or service is produced and sold. Contrarily, demand is determined by consumers and describes how much of a good or service is bought at a given price. Inflation usually occurs when supply does not keep up with demand. Prices for goods and services are always subject to change in a market economy. Some prices increase while others decrease. When prices of goods and services increase broadly rather than just for a few specific items, it is said to be inflation. This means that today, for the same amount of money, you can buy less than you could yesterday. Inflation then gradually lowers the value of the currency. However, in the long run, increasing demand may also lead to price increases, erasing some of the tax break's early positive effects. In a similar vein, declining interest rates could lead to both short-term happiness and long-term increased inflation. People will have more money to spend if banks and governments increase the amount of money and credit flowing into the economy. If they are all vying for the same set of commodities as before, it simply means that they can all make higher offers. Despite the complexity of the issue, monetary policy at the federal level can help manage inflation. The federal funds rate is increased by the Federal Reserve, America's central banking system in response to growing price inflation, an exclusive interest rate that applies to loans made in the banking industry. So it becomes more costly to borrow money as the federal funds rate rises because it results in an equal increase in interest rates on vehicle loans, mortgages, and other forms of credit. In order to allow supply chains to catch up to the production of the goods and services, which can result in a decrease in pricing, higher borrowing costs can help to slow down consumer and company expenditure. It is hoped that doing this will reduce inflation and balance both supply and demand without having longer-term effects like a recession. The federal government may opt to cut interest rates when inflation falls once more, making borrowing money easier and promoting expenditure. The U.S.'s central bank is called the Federal Reserve, and like central banks everywhere else, its job is to keep inflation at a steady level. The Federal Open Markets Committee has established that for the best employment and price stability, an inflation rate of about 2% is ideal. With this level of inflation, the FOMC has the ability to reduce interest rates, which lowers the cost of borrowing and helps increase demand during economic downturns. Lower interest rates make borrowing money more affordable for consumers and businesses, so boosting the economy. As a result of lower interest rates, people get less income from their savings, which encourages them to spend. However, all of this additional demand may raise inflation. But which economic factors actually trigger inflation? Well, actually, many factors can contribute to high inflation, but economists frequently categorize the underlying causes into two groups, and they are cost-push inflation and demand-pull inflation. See, inflation that is generated by consumer preferences as a whole is called demand-pull inflation. Companies might find themselves delivering more goods and services than they planned if customers start spending more money than normal. The leftover product becomes more expensive and prices may climb if these enterprises are unable to meet the rising consumer demand. This form of inflation frequently occurs when there is a high level of consumer confidence, such as when salaries are rising and the unemployment rate is low. Cost-push inflation happens when the cost of production goes up. These higher production costs, which have nothing to do with consumer demand, could result in a reduction in overall supply and subsequent rise in pricing to make up the difference. This type of inflation is frequently seen when the oil price rises and affects the cost of manufacturing processes. For instance, the cost-push inflation that took place in the 1970s was partly caused by the energy crises of the decade. Natural disasters or significant global events can block supply chain operations, cut back on the availability of goods, and increase the cost of the inventory that is still accessible. But how can a country monitor its level of inflation? A price index, which measures price adjustments across a certain set of goods and services, is used by economists to gauge hyperinflation. The Consumer Price Index and Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index are the two main indicators. Both have a similar purpose, which is to display the typical price variation of frequent purchases made by American families of goods and services. The Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices, sometimes known as the HICP, is used to calculate consumer price inflation in the Eurozone. This refers to the uniform process used by all of the European Union's member states. It makes it possible to compare data from one country to data from another. Now, despite all these, do you think a country's level of inflation still depends on the actions of the federal government? Well, we'd love to know your thoughts on the subject in the comments section below. And that is all for this video. Hey, if you enjoyed it, make sure you click the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, ensure that you click subscribe, and most importantly, click that bell icon to be notified when a new video is uploaded. Also, feel free to leave a remark if you have any recommendations for videos. All right, have a great day. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.